Imagine waking up in a world where winter does not just mean inconvenience, but actual death lurking at your doorstep every single morning. You are in medieval Europe, the year is 1409, and you are about to experience the most brutal season known to humanity. This is not the romantic, snow-dusted fairy tale you have seen in movies. This is winter as a merciless predator, and you are its prey. The morning air cuts through your threadbare woolen cloak like a blade made of ice. Your breath creates clouds, so thick you could almost grab them, and your fingers have long since lost all feeling despite being wrapped in strips of cloth that barely qualify as mittens. Welcome to your reality. You are a peasant in a small English village, and winter has just declared war on everything you hold dear. But here is the thing nobody tells you about medieval winters. They were not supposed to be this cruel. Something had changed in the world's very bones. Something that would later be called the Little Ice Age. From the 14th century onward, temperatures plummeted far below what anyone could remember. Rivers that had flowed freely for generations suddenly froze solid enough to hold entire markets on their surfaces. You stumble out of your single-room cottage, your bare feet hitting the frozen dirt floor with a shock that travels straight up. Your spine, your family, all 7 of you, had huddled together for warmth last night, along with your only cow and 3 chickens. The smell is indescribable, but it kept you alive. Your youngest sister, barely 4 years old, whimpers in her sleep. Her lips have taken on a blue tinge that makes your stomach clench with fear. The irony is almost laughable, if anything about this situation could inspire laughter. Last summer, you complained bitterly about the heat while working in the fields. Your woolen tunic felt like wearing a furnace, and you dreamed of cool breezes. Now, that same garment might as well be made of spider silk for all the protection it offers against winter's assault. Outside, the world has transformed into something alien and hostile. Icicles hang from your roof like crystalline daggers, some as thick as your arm and twice as long. The snow is not the gentle, powdery stuff of children as games. It is hard-packed and cruel, with a surface that cracks under your weight before giving way, sending you plunging knee-deep into the frigid depths below. Your neighbor, old William, waves from his doorway. He has survived 63 winters, a feat so remarkable that children whisper about him like he possesses magic powers. His secret, he often jokes with a gap-toothed grin, is simple stubbornness, and a complete inability to die on schedule. But even William's face looks grim this morning. This winter feels different, hungrier. The statistics would terrify you if you knew them. In some villages, nearly half the population would not see spring. Children were especially vulnerable. Their small bodies simply could not generate enough heat to survive month after month of bitter cold. Pregnant women faced impossible odds, their bodies struggling to nourish both themselves and their unborn children on rations that barely sustained one person. But you do not know these numbers. You only know that your stomach has not felt truly full since October, that your father's cough has gotten steadily worse, and that your mother spends increasingly long periods staring into the meager fire with hollow eyes that seem to be calculating something you do not want to understand. The church bells ring in the distance, calling the faithful to morning prayer. You wonder if God can hear prayers through all this ice and snow, or if even divine mercy freezes solid at these temperatures. Father Benedict preaches about endurance and faith, but his words seem thin and brittle in air this cold. Your daily routine begins with the same desperate calculus that governs every medieval winter morning. Firewood first, or food? Both are running dangerously low and venturing out to search for either means risking your life. The forest is treacherous, with hidden ice and snow-covered pits that could swallow a person whole. Last week, young Thomas from the next village over simply vanished while gathering kindling. They found his body 3 days later, frozen solid beneath a drift. Therefore, you choose firewood. Without heat, food becomes irrelevant very quickly. You wrap your feet in additional rags and venture into the white wasteland that used to be your familiar countryside. Every step is a negotiation with winter itself. The wind does not just blow, it attacks, finding every gap in your clothing and exploiting it ruthlessly. The irony of your situation would be amusing if it were not so deadly. You live in an age where people believe the world is flat, where bloodletting is considered advanced medicine, and where most people never travel more than 10 miles from where they were born. Yet you possess a sophisticated understanding of survival that would impress modern emergency specialists. You know exactly how long you can stay outside before frostbite becomes irreversible. You can read weather signs in cloud formations and wind patterns with uncanny accuracy. You understand caloric conservation in ways that would make nutritionists weep. But understanding and surviving are two very different things. As you trudge through the snow, dragging a pathetic bundle of frozen twigs behind you, you cannot help but wonder if this will be the winter that finally defeats your family, the winter that transforms you from survivors into statistics. Then you see smoke rising from Agnes, the widow's cottage. Or rather, you see the absence of smoke, which is far more alarming. Agnes is 68 years old and lives alone since her husband died of fever 2 winters ago. In this cold, no smoke means no fire, and no fire means death is probably already knocking on her door. You stand there for a moment, your own survival instincts warring with something deeper. You have barely enough firewood for your own family. Sharing it could mean condemning your little sister to the same fate you are trying to save Agnes from. But then you remember your mother's words from just last week. We survive winter together, or we do not survive it at all. Therefore, you change direction, your feet crunching through the snow, toward Agnes's cottage. Winter may be trying to turn you all into islands of desperation, but you refuse to let it win that particular battle. Not today. As you approach her door, you notice something that makes your heart race with hope rather than fear. There, barely visible in the snow beside her cottage, are the deep footprints of someone much larger than Agnes. Someone has already been here this morning. The cottage door opens before you can knock, revealing not just Agnes, but Marcus, the village's young blacksmith apprentice. His cheeks are red with cold and exertion, but his eyes sparkle with the particular satisfaction that comes from doing something genuinely good in a world that offers precious few opportunities for goodness. "Morning," he says simply, as if finding him here chopping firewood for an elderly widow is the most natural thing in the world. Agnes was just about to start some porridge, enough for 3 if you are interested, and there it is. The thing that winter cannot freeze, cannot starve, cannot kill no matter how hard it tries. The thing that has kept humanity alive through every ice age, every famine, every catastrophe that nature has thrown at the species. The simple, stubborn insistence on taking care of each other. You accept the invitation, naturally, outside. Winter continues its relentless assault on everything living. But inside Agnes's cottage, around a fire fed by Marcus's labor and warmed by shared humanity, winter feels just a little less invincible. This is how you survive a medieval winter. Not through individual heroics or superior technology, but through the quiet, daily decision to remain human in the face of inhuman conditions. It is not glamorous, and it certainly is not easy, but it works, most of the time, anyway. The porridge tastes like water flavored with the memory of oats, but it is warm, and warmth has become more precious than gold in these frozen months. You sit on Agnes's three-legged stool, your hands wrapped around a wooden bowl that radiates heat like a tiny sun, and for the first time in weeks, you feel almost human. Agnes herself is a marvel of medieval engineering. At 68, she should have been dead a decade ago by any reasonable calculation. Women her age simply did not survive the accumulated trauma of childbirth, manual labor, and repeated winters that tested the limits of human endurance. Yet here she sits, her back straight as a church spire, her grey eyes sharp as winter itself, ladling out portions with the precise movements of someone who has never wasted a grain of anything in her entire life. Marcus brought turnips, she announces, as if turnips are exotic delicacies rather than the bitter, woody vegetables that have sustained your village through countless lean times. Found them in his grandmother's root cellar. She had forgotten about them entirely. Marcus grins, and you notice that even his smile seems to generate warmth. There is something about him that defies winter's attempt to leech all joy from the world. He is 19, built like a young oak tree, with hands that show the particular calluses of someone who spends his days wrestling red-hot iron into submission. More importantly, he possesses that rarest of medieval qualities, optimism that seems genuine rather than desperate. Grandmother claims she has no memory of storing them, he continues, his eyes twinkling with mischief. But I noticed she was very specific about how we should prepare them. Curious how detailed her amnesia becomes when it involves feeding. The village, you laugh, actually laugh, and the sound feels strange in your throat. When did you last laugh? October, September. The realization is sobering. Winter has not just frozen the ground and the rivers. It has frozen parts of your soul you did not even realize were capable of freezing. Agnes stirs the porridge with a wooden spoon worn smooth by decades of use. Your grandmother, she tells Marcus, has been performing strategic forgetfulness for 40 years. During the famine of 73, she suddenly could not remember where she had hidden 3 entire wheels of cheese. Amazing how her memory cleared up the moment hungry children appeared at her door. The conversation is interrupted by a commotion outside. Voices urgent and distressed, cutting through the morning air like ice shards. Marcus is on his feet immediately, his hand already reaching for the heavy iron poker beside the fireplace. In medieval winters, unexpected visitors often brought news that nobody wanted to hear. Agnes peers through the single small window, her breath fogging the oiled parchment that serves as glass. "It is Lady Cordelia," she says, and you hear genuine surprise in her voice, with 2 of her men, and they are carrying something. This is unprecedented. Lady Cordelia Ashworth, wife of the local lord, does not venture into the village during winter. She certainly does not appear at the cottage of an elderly widow at dawn, accompanied by armed guards. Your mind immediately jumps to the worst possibilities. Plague, invading armies, or the dreaded tax collectors, who sometimes appeared even in the depths of winter to extract the last coins from purses that had been empty since harvest time. Marcus opens the door, and cold air rushes in like an invading army. Lady Cordelia sweeps through the entrance, and despite everything you know about the harsh realities of medieval class distinctions, you cannot help but be impressed. She is 42 years old, which makes her practically ancient by the standards of noble women, yet she moves with the fluid grace of someone half her age. Her cloak is made of wool so fine it seems to glow, lined with fur that probably cost more than your family's cottage. But it is her face that captures your attention. Lady Cordelia's features carry the particular weight that comes from making life and death decisions for hundreds of people. Her blue eyes hold a combination of steel and compassion that you have never seen before, and when she speaks, her voice carries the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Agnes," she says, inclining her head with genuine respect. "Marcus, and you must be young Edmund from the mill cottage." The fact that she knows your name sends a chill through you that has nothing to do with the open door. Nobles do not learn peasant names unless something significant is about to happen. My Lady Agnes responds, executing a curtsy that would have been impressive if she were not wearing 3 layers of patched wool and holding a porridge ladle. "To what do we owe this honor?" Lady Cordelia gestures to her men, who step forward, carrying what appears to be a large wooden chest. "I have come to discuss winter," she says simply, "and survival, and the fact that if we do not work together, half this village will be dead before Easter." The bluntness of her statement hangs in the air like smoke. In your experience, nobles prefer to discuss peasant mortality in abstract terms, if they discuss it at all. They certainly do not appear at cottage doors with mysterious chests and urgent expressions. The harvest reports from surrounding regions are worse than we feared. Lady Cordelia continues, apparently oblivious to the fact that she has just shattered every social convention that governs interactions between nobility and peasantry. The abbot of St. Bartholomew sent word yesterday. 3 villages in his territory are already showing signs of serious famine. Children have begun dying. Marcus sets down the poker, his expression growing serious. "How bad?" he asks, and you notice that he addresses her without any of the usual honorifics. Somehow, the urgency of the situation has temporarily suspended the normal rules. "Bad enough that I am here, in peasant cottages, at dawn, carrying grain from my personal stores," Lady Cordelia replies. "Bad enough that my husband thinks I have lost my mind." She signals her men, who open the chest to reveal sacks of wheat, barley, and what appears to be actual white flour. The sight is so shocking that you nearly drop your porridge bowl. White flour is the stuff of legend in your world, something you have heard exists, but never actually seen. Nobles might eat bread made from it, but peasants subsist on coarse brown loaves that are more bark and sawdust than actual grain. But therefore, my Lady Agnes says carefully, you risk your own family's survival by sharing these stores. Lady Cordelia's smile contains enough iron to forge a sword. "Agnes, my family lives in a stone castle with walls 6 feet thick, cellars stocked with enough preserved food to last until summer, and fireplaces large enough to roast entire deer. If we cannot survive this winter with those advantages, we deserve whatever fate awaits us." She pauses, looking around the cottage with eyes that miss nothing. The thin walls, the single small fire, the 3 people sharing space meant for one. Moreover, if all of you die, who exactly will plant our fields come spring? Who will tend our livestock, maintain our mills, craft our tools? Nobility without peasantry is just expensive starvation with better clothes. The logic is unassailable, but also revolutionary. You have never heard a noble speak about the interdependence between classes with such brutal honesty. Usually, They prefer to maintain the fiction that peasants exist solely for the privilege of serving their betters. What do you propose? Marcus asks, and you realize that somehow, in the space of 10 minutes, your simple morning meal has transformed into a war council. Community survival. Lady Cordelia replies. Shared resources, coordinated food distribution, and the temporary suspension of certain social niceties that become luxuries we cannot afford when death is stalking the village. Agnes sets down her ladle and studies the noblewoman with calculating eyes. And what do you require from us in return? Honesty about how bad things really are, Lady Cordelia says. No pride, no pretense, no dying quietly in corners to avoid troubling your betters. If someone is starving, I need to know. If someone is sick, I need to know. If someone has extra resources they can share, I need to know that too. The proposal hangs in the air like incense, strange and unprecedented. You try to imagine your father's reaction to being told that he should report his family's struggles directly to nobility. Try to picture your mother accepting charity from the same people who normally collect taxes that leave your family scrambling to survive. But then you think about your little sister's blue lips, about old William's worried expression, about the smoke that was not rising from Agnes's chimney this morning. You think about the fact that winter has barely begun, and already the spectre of death is making its presence known in your village. There is one more thing, Lady Cordelia adds, her voice carrying a note you cannot quite identify. I am not the only one who has noticed the severity of this winter. There are rumors of villages to the north that have already resorted to desperate measures that no Christian should ever contemplate. The implication sends ice through your veins that has nothing to do with temperature. You have heard whispers of what happens when famine reaches its deepest depths, when the choice becomes cannibalism or death. The stories are always about distant places, other people, situations too horrible to imagine affecting your own community. But looking at Lady Cordelia's expression, you realize that those distant horrors may not be distant much longer. What do you need us to do? Agnes asks quietly. Meet me at the church tomorrow after morning prayers, Lady Cordelia replies. Bring representatives from every household. We are going to organize this village for survival, and we are going to do it before desperation makes monsters of us all. She turns to leave, then pauses at the door, and Agnes, keep that fire burning, whatever it takes. A cold hearth is a dead household, and we cannot afford to lose anyone. After she leaves, the three of you sit in stunned silence. Outside, winter continues its assault, but something has changed. For the first time since the cold began, you feel like you might have allies in this fight. But as Marcus banks the fire and you prepare to return to your own cottage, you cannot shake the feeling that Lady Cordelia's visit represents more than just noble charity. It feels like preparation for a siege, and you are beginning to suspect that the enemy is not just winter itself, but something far more dangerous. The desperation that winter breeds in human hearts. The church bells that summon you to morning prayers sound different today. Their bronze voices carrying an urgency that echoes off the frozen stones of St. Bartholomew's. You arrive to find the small building packed beyond capacity. Buddy, pressed together not just for warmth, but for the comfort of shared anxiety. Every face in the congregation carries the same expression, the hollow-eyed look of people who have been calculating survival in increasingly desperate mathematics. Father Benedict, usually robust despite his 60 years, appears to have aged a decade overnight. His sermon is brief and practical rather than theological, focusing on the virtue of community cooperation rather than abstract spiritual concepts. Even God, it seems, has become pragmatic in the face of this winter's unprecedented cruelty. Let us pray, he concludes, for wisdom in dark times, for strength in weak moments, and for the grace to remember that we are all children of the same Father, regardless of the station he has assigned us in this life. As the congregation files out, you notice the subtle reorganization that has already begun. Families are clustering together differently, forming groups based on resources and needs rather than blood relationships. Old Henrik, the miller, stands, deep in conversation with young Peter, the carpenter's son, their heads bent over what appears to be detailed planning rather than casual conversation. Lady Cordelia waits near the church steps, no longer accompanied by armed guards, but flanked instead by an unlikely collection of individuals. Brother Francis, the monastery's herbalist, Sarah the wise, the village's unofficial healer, and, surprisingly, your own village's most notorious miser, Aldrich the merchant. Aldrich's presence is perhaps the most shocking development yet. The man has spent 40 years acquiring wealth through careful trade and ruthless negotiation, earning a reputation for charging interest on loans to widows and demanding payment for grain even when children were starving. Yet here he stands, his thin frame wrapped in an expensive woolen cloak, apparently prepared to participate in communal survival efforts. Good Lady Cordelia says, as the crowd assembles, "We are all here now. Before we begin, I want everyone to understand exactly what we are facing." She produces a scroll from beneath her cloak, unrolling it to reveal a hand-drawn map of the surrounding region. Red marks dot the parchment like drops of blood, each one representing a village or hamlet. These are the settlements that have already reported deaths from starvation or exposure, she continues, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. This winter began in earnest only 6 weeks ago. At this rate of mortality, some of these places will be completely empty by spring. A murmur runs through the assembled villagers, the sound of fear taking root in collective consciousness. You recognize several of the marked locations, places where you have relatives, where your friends have traveled to trade or find work. But therefore, interrupts Aldrich, and his voice carries the sharp edge of someone accustomed to finding profit in other people's desperation. What makes you believe our situation will be different? Lady Cordelia's smile could have frozen water at 20 paces. Because, Aldrich, we are going to do something that apparently has not occurred to the people running those other villages. We are going to use our resources intelligently instead, affording them until we all die separately. Brother Francis steps forward, his young face serious beneath his monk's hood. At only 26, he has already earned a reputation for possessing the most comprehensive knowledge of herbal medicine in 3 counties. More importantly, he possesses something even rarer, the ability to diagnose and treat the diseases that flourish in winter's harsh conditions. I have been tracking the patterns of illness in our village, he says, producing his own scroll covered with careful notations. Respiratory infections, digestive ailments, and what I believe are the early stages of scurvy. The good news is that all of these conditions can be prevented or treated if we act quickly. Sarah the wise nods approvingly, despite being a woman. In a world that generally considers female medical knowledge suspect, she has earned universal respect through 40 years of successfully treating everything from difficult births to infected wounds. Her cottage herb garden, now buried under 3 feet of snow, contains remedies that have saved more lives than the monastery's official physicians. The monks have been brewing pine needle tea, Sarah adds. Tastes terrible, but it prevents the bleeding sickness that killed so many 2 winters ago. Between Brother Francis's herbs and my stored remedies, we can keep the village healthy, but only if people actually come for treatment instead of dying quietly in their cottages. You think of your father's persistent cough, of the way your mother has been favoring her left side as if something inside hurts. How many families are hiding similar symptoms, either from pride or from the fear that admitting weakness might somehow make survival even more precarious? Lady Cordelia rolls up her map and fixes the crowd with a stare that could have melted the church's stone walls. Here is what we are going to do, she announces. And I want to be very clear. This is not a request. This is a survival plan, and everyone participates or everyone dies. She begins outlining a system so comprehensive and revolutionary that you struggle to believe it could actually work. Food distribution based on need rather than ability to pay. Shared childcare so that adults can focus on essential winter tasks without worrying about their children freezing. Coordinated firewood gathering expeditions that pool risk and maximize efficiency. Every household will contribute according to their ability, she continues. Those with grain contribute grain. Those with skills contribute labor. Those with knowledge contribute teaching. And yes, Aldrich, those with money contribute financial resources. Aldrich's objection is predictable and immediate. And what prevents people from taking advantage of this system? What stops the lazy from benefiting while the industrious suffer? Marcus, who has been listening with the focused attention of someone taking mental notes, speaks up before Lady Cordelia can respond. Starvation, he says simply. If the system fails, we all starve. If people cheat, we all freeze. The stakes are too high for anyone to risk gaming the system. The logic is unassailable, but you can see doubt flickering across several faces in the crowd. Medieval society runs on rigid hierarchies and careful resource hoarding precisely because people have learned not to trust communal solutions. The idea of suddenly sharing everything with neighbors who might have been competitors or even enemies just months ago requires a leap of faith that feels almost supernatural. Agnes, who has been standing quietly near the back of the group, raises her voice just enough to be heard. I have lived through 17 winters in this village, she says. I have seen what happens when we try to survive alone, and I have seen what happens when we help each other. The winters when we shared resources, more children lived to see spring. The winters when we hoarded and competed, we spent spring burying the dead. Her words carry the weight of lived experience, and you notice several heads nodding in agreement. Agnes has become an unofficial repository of village memory. Someone whose survival through so many harsh seasons gives her observations unquestionable authority. There is one more thing, Lady Cordelia adds, and her tone suggests that this final point might be the most important of all. News arrived yesterday from the north. The village of Millbrook has been abandoned entirely. The survivors walked south, looking for food and shelter. They are heading in our direction. The implication hits the crowd like a physical blow. Refugees means additional mouths to feed with resources that are already stretched to their limits. It also means potential sources of disease, crime, and social disruption. In normal times, villagers might turn away desperate travelers, but these are not normal times, and Lady Cordelia's expression suggests that turning people away is not an option she is prepared to consider. How many? Asks old Henrik, his voice tight with concern. 27, Lady Cordelia replies. Mostly women and children. They should arrive within the week. The mathematical implications are staggering. Your village currently supports perhaps 90 people through the winter months, and that calculation assumes favorable conditions and careful resource management. Adding 30% more people to the equation could transform a difficult winter into an impossible one. But as you look around at the faces of your neighbors, you notice something unexpected. Instead of despair or anger, you see determination. The same stubborn refusal to surrender that has carried your families through countless previous winters is reasserting itself, but now directed toward communal rather than individual survival. Then we had better get organized quickly, Marcus says, and his tone suggests that he has already begun formulating plans. 27 more people means we need to increase our efficiency by at least 30%. That is doable, but only if we start immediately. Lady Cordelia nods approvingly. Exactly. Which brings us to the final part of today's meeting. We need to select coordinators for different aspects of our survival plan. People who can make decisions quickly and enforce them when necessary. The selection process that follows would have been unthinkable just days ago. Social barriers that have defined village life for generations dissolve as people. Choose leaders based on competence rather than birth status. Marcus becomes the coordinator for resource gathering and distribution. Sarah and Brother Francis will jointly manage medical care. Agnes, despite her age, accepts responsibility for coordinating food, preparation, and childcare. And in a development that surprises everyone, including yourself, you find yourself selected as the coordinator for refugee integration. The responsibility feels enormous, but you realize that someone needs to figure out how to absorb 27 additional people into a community that is already operating at the margins of survival. As the meeting disperses, Lady Cordelia approaches you privately. Edmund, she says, using your name with the same casual authority she might use to address a fellow noble. I chose you for refugee coordination for a specific reason. You have something most people lack, the ability to see situations from multiple perspectives without losing sight of practical necessities. The compliment is flattering, but you sense that it comes with equally significant expectations. What do you need me to do? Figure out how to make this work, she replies simply. 27 people who have lost everything, arriving in a village that is already struggling to survive. You need to find a way to turn that potential disaster into a source of strength. As she walks away, you stand in the churchyard watching. Your neighbors scatter to their cottages, each person now carrying a specific responsibility for communal survival. The transformation feels surreal. Just this morning, you were a peasant worried about gathering enough firewood to keep your family alive. Now you are part of an unprecedented experiment in cooperative survival, responsible for integrating refugees into a community that is reinventing itself in real time. The wind picks up, sending snow swirling around the church like ghostly dancers. Winter is far from finished with its assault, and you suspect that the next few weeks will test every assumption you have ever held about human nature, social organization, and the limits of what desperate people can accomplish when they work together. But for the first time since the cold began, you feel something that has been absent from your life for months. Hope. Not the desperate, brittle hope that comes from denial, but the solid, practical hope that emerges when intelligent people commit to solving problems together. The refugees are coming, winter is deepening, and death continues to stalk the countryside. But your village is no longer facing these challenges as a collection of frightened individuals. You are now something unprecedented, a community that has chosen cooperation over competition, intelligence over tradition, and collective survival over individual advantage. Whether it will be enough remains to be seen. But as you trudge back through the snow toward your cottage, you find yourself almost eager to discover what tomorrow will bring. The refugees arrive on a Tuesday morning that dawns so cold your breath freezes before it leaves your lungs. You are checking the communal food stores in the church basement when Marcus bursts through the heavy wooden doors, his face flushed with exertion and something that might be panic. "They are here," he announces, his words creating clouds of vapor that hang in the frigid air like small ghosts. 27 people, just as Lady Cordelia predicted. But Edmund... He pauses, running a hand through hair that has acquired a coating of frost during his sprint from the village outskirts. "They are in worse condition than we expected." You set down the ledger where you have been carefully tracking grain distribution and follow Marcus outside. The sight that greets you would be heartbreaking if you had any emotional energy left for heartbreak. The refugees are arranged in a struggling line that stretches from the village common to the edge of the forest, each person carrying what appears to be the entirety of their worldly possessions in bundles so small they could not possibly contain enough to sustain life. But it is their faces that tell the real story. These are people who have looked death directly in the eye and made uncomfortable accommodations with it. Their expressions carry the hollow emptiness of individuals who have been forced to make choices that no human should ever have to make. You realize with a chill that has nothing to do with temperature that some of these people have probably watched their children die. At the front of the group stands a woman who might be 30 or might be 50. Starvation has a way of making age impossible to determine. Her name, you learn quickly, is Catherine, and she speaks with the careful precision of someone who has been chosen to negotiate for the survival of an entire group. "We come seeking shelter," she says, addressing you with the formal courtesy of someone who understands that their life depends entirely on the next few minutes of conversation. "We have skills to offer in exchange for food and warmth. We are not beggars, but we are desperate." Behind her, a man who appears to be carved from winter itself holds the hand of a child who cannot be more than 6 years old. The child's eyes are too large for his face, giving him the ethereal appearance of someone whose spirit is already partially detached from his body. You have seen that look before, during the famine 3 years ago. It means the child has perhaps a week left unless his situation improves dramatically. Lady Cordelia appears at your shoulder with the efficiency of someone who has spent decades managing crises. She surveys the refugees with the calculating gaze of a military commander assessing battlefield conditions, then turns to you with an expression that manages to be both encouraging and terrifying. "Well," she says quietly, "this is what we prepared for. Time to discover whether our theories about cooperative survival actually work in practice." The next several hours unfold like a carefully choreographed dance between desperation and organization. Agnes has already begun organizing the village women to prepare massive quantities of thin but nourishing soup, using vegetables that were meant to last another month but suddenly seem less important than keeping 27 additional people alive through the next few days. Brother Francis moves through the refugee group with the methodical efficiency of someone conducting medical triage, identifying the most urgent cases while making mental notes about resources that will be needed. His preliminary assessment is both better and worse than you feared. No signs of plague or other contagious diseases, but clear evidence of of severe malnutrition and the early stages of conditions that could become life-threatening without immediate intervention. The logistical challenges are staggering. Your village's carefully calculated winter survival plan was designed for 90 people. Adding 27 refugees means recalculating everything: food distribution, fuel consumption, sleeping arrangements, work assignments, and waste management. Every equation that took weeks to perfect now requires immediate revision. But as you watch your neighbors respond to the crisis, something remarkable begins to emerge. Instead of resentment or fear, you see problem solving. Instead of territorial behavior, you witness unprecedented cooperation. Old Henrik immediately offers to share his cottage with 2 refugee families, even though this means his own children will be sleeping on the floor. Young Peter begins sketching plans for expanding the communal sleeping areas in the church basement. Most surprisingly, Aldrich the merchant approaches you with a proposal that defies everything you thought you knew about his character. "I have been thinking," he says, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic note of uncertainty. "These refugees probably have knowledge about conditions in other regions. Information about which trade routes are still passable, which communities have surplus resources, which areas should be avoided." You stare at him, trying to process the implications of what he is suggesting. "You want to trade with them. I want to trade for them," he corrects. "Use their knowledge to identify opportunities for acquiring additional resources that could benefit everyone. Turn their refugee status into an advantage rather than just a burden." The idea is so unexpected that you need a moment to appreciate. It's genius. Instead of viewing the refugees purely as additional mouths to feed, Aldrich is proposing to treat them as sources of valuable intelligence about the broader region as winter conditions. Information that could be leveraged to improve everyone's chances of survival. Catherine, the refugee spokesperson, proves to be remarkably receptive to this approach. "We traveled through 7 villages on our way here," she tells the hastily assembled planning committee. 3 were completely abandoned, but 2 had successful winter markets still operating. They were trading preserved fish for grain, and they had more firewood than they could use. Marcus immediately begins calculating travel times and resource requirements for potential trading expeditions. If we organized carefully, we could reach those markets and return within 4 days. The question is whether we can spare the people and resources for trading expeditions when we are already operating at maximum capacity. Lady Cordelia settles the debate with characteristic decisiveness. "We cannot afford not to explore these opportunities. Our current resources will sustain everyone through winter, but with no margin for error. If we can acquire additional supplies, we transform a survival situation into a sustainable one." The next phase of refugee integration proceeds with remarkable smoothness, largely because everyone involved understands that failure means death for the entire community. Sleeping arrangements are reorganized to maximize warmth efficiency. Work assignments are redistributed to take advantage of refugee skills, while ensuring that essential tasks continue to be performed. You discover that among the refugees are 2 individuals whose expertise could prove invaluable: a woman named Margaret, who spent 10 years as assistant to a monastery physician, and a man named David, whose knowledge of winter hunting techniques surpasses anyone currently in the village. Margaret immediately begins working with Brother Francis and Sarah the Wise to expand the community's medical capabilities. Her knowledge of treating frostbite and pneumonia proves particularly valuable as winter deepens and these conditions become increasingly common. David's contribution is even more dramatic. Within 3 days of his arrival, he has organized hunting expeditions that return with fresh meat for the first time in weeks. His techniques for tracking animals in snow conditions and setting traps that remain effective in freezing temperatures represent knowledge that could mean the difference between adequate nutrition and slow starvation. But it is the psychological transformation that proves most remarkable. The presence of refugees who have lost everything somehow puts everyone else's situation into perspective. Complaints about cold cottages and monotonous food disappear when spoken in the presence of people who recently slept in snowbanks and subsisted on tree bark. More importantly, the refugees bring stories of successful survival strategies from other communities. Tales of villages that organized massive communal fires in their central squares, keeping entire populations warm through the worst nights. Accounts of communities that survived by sending their strongest members on organized expeditions to hunt, trade, and gather resources, while the rest focused on conservation and efficiency. 1 week after their arrival, you conduct the first formal assessment of the refugee integration process. The results are so positive, they seem almost impossible. Not only has the community successfully absorbed 27 additional people, without significant disruption, but overall efficiency has actually improved. The refugees' knowledge of regional conditions has enabled trading expeditions that returned with surplus resources. Their additional labor has accelerated essential winter tasks like firewood gathering and food preparation. Most importantly, their presence has somehow solidified the community's commitment to cooperative survival. But success brings its own challenges. Word of your village's effective refugee management has begun to spread, and rumors suggest that additional groups of displaced people are heading in your direction. Lady Cordelia receives reports of at least 50 more people currently traveling south, seeking communities that might accept them. The prospect of integrating another 50 refugees tests the limits of even the most optimistic calculations. Your current success has been built on careful resource management and efficient organization. But there are absolute physical limits to how many people the village can support through a winter that shows no signs of moderating. During an emergency planning session held in the church on a night when the wind howls like something alive and angry, the debate becomes intense. Agnes argues for accepting everyone who arrives, claiming that moral obligation outweighs practical considerations. Aldrich counters that accepting too many people could doom everyone, making caution a form of compassion rather than selfishness. Marcus proposes a middle path, accepting additional refugees only if they bring specific skills or resources that add more value than they consume. But this approach raises uncomfortable questions about how to evaluate human worth during a crisis, and who gets to make such determinations. Brother Francis offers a different perspective, arguing that the community's success with the first group of refugees demonstrates that previous assumptions about resource limits might have been too conservative. Perhaps, he suggests, we have been thinking too small. Perhaps the solution is not to limit the number of people we accept, but to expand our capacity to support them. The discussion continues late into the night, but by morning, a consensus emerges. The village will accept additional refugees, but with the understanding that everyone above the current 50-person capacity will be considered. Temporary residents who will be relocated to other communities as soon as spring travel becomes possible. This decision transforms refugee integration from a one-time crisis into an ongoing operation that requires permanent organizational structures. You find yourself appointed as the head of what Lady Cordelia formally designates the Community Expansion Council, responsible for managing the continuous flow of displaced people while maintaining the village's survival capabilities. The appointment feels simultaneously honorable and terrifying. You are now responsible for decisions that will directly impact whether dozens of people live or die over the next several months. But as you look around at the faces of people who have somehow transformed a desperate survival situation into a functioning cooperative community, you feel something that might actually be confidence. Winter is far from over, and the challenges ahead will test every assumption you have made about human nature and community organization. But your village has already accomplished something that seemed impossible just weeks ago, turning scarcity into abundance through intelligent cooperation and shared sacrifice. The refugees who arrived as desperate strangers have become integral members of a community that is stronger and more resilient than anyone could have predicted. And as you settle into your expanded responsibilities, you cannot help but wonder what other impossibilities might become possible before spring finally arrives. 3 weeks into February, winter reveals its cruelest trick yet. Just when you begin to believe you might actually survive, it delivers a blow that threatens to shatter everything you have built. The blizzard arrives on a Thursday night with the fury of something personal and vindictive, bringing winds that shake the church bells and snow that falls so thick it becomes impossible to see more than arm's length in any direction. By Friday morning, the village is completely buried. Drifts reach the eaves of cottages, and the carefully maintained paths between buildings have vanished beneath an ocean of white that seems to shift and breathe with malevolent life. More critically, the storm has severed all connection to the outside world just as the second wave of refugees was expected to arrive. You stand in the church basement, staring at supply inventories that have suddenly become exercises in pure mathematics. 53 people trapped in a village cut off from all external resources, with food stores that were calculated to last until March, but are now being consumed faster than anticipated due to the additional energy required to maintain body heat in these unprecedented conditions. Marcus appears at your shoulder, his face carrying the grim expression of someone who has been doing similar calculations. If the storm continues for more than 3 days, he says quietly, we will need to implement emergency rationing immediately. And if it lasts a week, he does not finish the sentence, but the implication hangs in the air like smoke. Lady Cordelia calls an emergency meeting, but gathering everyone proves nearly impossible. The snow is too deep for normal movement, and several cottages have become completely inaccessible. Communication becomes a relay system involving shouted messages and human chains formed to pass information from building to building. When the leadership council finally assembles in the church, the atmosphere carries the peculiar tension that emerges when intelligent people confront problems that might not have solutions. Agnes sits wrapped in so many layers of wool that she resembles a small mountain, but her eyes remain sharp and calculating. Brother Francis has acquired the hollow-eyed look of someone who has been awake for 36 hours straight, monitoring the medical condition of people whose resistance to cold-related illness is being tested beyond all reasonable limits. The immediate crisis is fuel, Lady Cordelia announces without preamble. The storm has made it impossible to gather additional firewood, and our current stores will not sustain adequate heating for more than 4 days if consumption continues. At current levels, Aldrich produces a scroll covered with calculations that would impress a monastery scribe. I have been analyzing consumption patterns, he says, his merchant mind apparently capable of reducing survival to pure numbers. If we consolidate heating to only 3 locations, the church, Henrik's large cottage, and the manor hall, we can extend fuel supplies to perhaps 8 days. The proposal is logical but devastating. Consolidating heating means abandoning individual cottages and cramming the entire village population into 3 buildings. Privacy disappears, personal space becomes non-existent, and the risk of disease transmission increases exponentially. But as you listen to the debate, you realize that something more fundamental is at stake. The cooperative survival experiment that has defined your village's winter response is about to face its ultimate test. Shared resources and collective decision-making are easy to maintain when everyone has personal space and individual hearths. Creating a functional community when 53 people are packed into 3 rooms for potentially weeks requires the level of social organization that no one has ever attempted. Margaret, the refugee physician, raises the medical concerns with professional precision. Respiratory infections will spread rapidly in close quarters, she warns. We will also see increased incidence of what the ancients called cabin fever. The psychological strain of prolonged confinement with no privacy and limited activity. David, the refugee hunter, offers a different perspective. In my grandfather's time, entire extended families spent winters in single rooms. They had social structures for managing close quarters, rules about personal behavior, systems for resolving conflicts, traditions that maintained group cohesion even under extreme stress. Agnes nods approvingly. My grandmother used to tell stories about the Great Blizzard of 38, lasted nearly 3 weeks, and half the village moved into the church for the duration. They said it was the winter that taught them the difference between privacy and survival. The decision, when it comes, feels both inevitable and revolutionary. The village will implement full consolidation, but with careful attention to social structures that prevent close quarters from becoming chaos. Sleeping areas will be organized by family groups, but with clear boundaries. Daily routines will be established to ensure that everyone has designated times for privacy and personal care. Most importantly, leadership structures will be formalized to handle conflicts and decision-making in an environment where tensions could escalate rapidly. The process of moving 53 people and their essential possessions into 3 buildings during a raging blizzard proves to be an exercise in logistics that would challenge military engineers. Human chains form to pass bundles of belongings through snow that reaches chest height on grown men. Children are carried rather than attempting to walk, and the elderly are transported on makeshift sleds pulled by teams of the strongest villagers. Henrik's cottage, which seemed spacious for his family of 6, becomes a carefully organized puzzle of sleeping spaces that accommodate 18 people. The church basement transforms into a combination dormitory, kitchen, and common room that houses 24 individuals. Lady Cordelia's manor hall, with its massive hearth and thick stone walls, becomes home to 11 people, including herself. A mixing of social classes that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. But it is the psychological adaptation that proves most remarkable. Within 48 hours, the 3 consolidated locations develop distinct cultures and social rhythms that seem to emerge spontaneously from the necessity of close quarters living. Henrik's cottage becomes the center for organized activities and games. Someone discovers a set of carved wooden pieces that can be used for various games, and tournaments emerge that provide entertainment while teaching patience and strategic thinking. Agnes, despite her age, proves to be remarkably gifted at organizing activities that keep children occupied without disturbing adults who need rest or quiet. The church develops into the community's intellectual and spiritual center. Brother Francis organizes daily discussions about everything from herbal medicine to theology. while Sarah the Wise shares knowledge about traditional crafts that can be practiced in limited space. Evening prayers become communal activities that provide structure and comfort rather than mere religious obligation. Most surprisingly, Lady Cordelia's Manor Hall evolves into something resembling a medieval think tank. The combination of noble resources, refugee knowledge, and peasant practical experience creates an environment where problems are analyzed from multiple perspectives and solutions emerge that none of the individual groups could have developed. Alone, you find yourself moving between all three locations, serving as both coordinator and mediator as social dynamics evolve in real time. The role requires skills you never knew you possessed: diplomacy when personality conflicts arise, creativity when boredom threatens to become destructive, and judgment when resource allocation decisions must be made with incomplete information. On the storm's fifth day, David makes a discovery that changes everything. While checking the manor hall's cellars for additional supplies, he finds evidence of a tunnel system that connects the three consolidated locations. The tunnels, apparently built for defensive purposes during some long-forgotten conflict, have been sealed and forgotten for decades. The implications are staggering. Instead of three isolated groups struggling to maintain communication through dangerous surface travel, the village could function as a single interconnected community, with protected passage between locations. But the tunnels require significant work to clear debris and ensure structural safety. Marcus immediately begins organizing work crews to excavate and repair the tunnel system. Despite the fact that the labor must be performed with minimal tools in cramped conditions, the project becomes a community effort that provides physical activity for people who are beginning to suffer from prolonged inactivity, while creating infrastructure that could transform the village's long-term survival capabilities. The tunnel excavation also reveals additional storage areas that contain supplies dating back several generations, old grain stores that are still edible, preserved meats that were forgotten and overlooked, tools and materials that could prove invaluable for winter crafts and repairs. The discoveries extend the village's resource base just when extension seemed impossible. But perhaps most importantly, the tunnel project provides a collective goal that unifies the entire community. Working together to create connections between the three consolidated locations becomes a metaphor for the larger project of creating social connections that can survive extreme circumstances. By the storm's seventh day, the tunnel system is functional enough to allow movement between all three locations without surface exposure. Children discover that the tunnels create excellent play spaces, while adults appreciate the ability to move freely even during the worst weather. The psychological impact of connectivity proves as valuable as the practical benefits. When the blizzard finally exhausts itself on the eighth day, emerging villagers find a landscape so transformed it seems like an entirely different world. Snowdrifts reach second-story windows. Unfamiliar landmarks have vanished beneath white expanses that stretch to the horizon. But instead of feeling defeated by winter's assault, the community emerges stronger and more organized than ever. The consolidation experiment has succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Not only did 53 people survive 8 days of confinement without serious conflicts or medical crises, but they created social structures and physical infrastructure that enhanced the village's long-term survival capabilities. As you help with the process of clearing paths and reopening access to essential buildings, you realize that winter has inadvertently given your community something invaluable: proof that cooperation can overcome challenges that would defeat any individual effort. The blizzard forced innovations and adaptations that might never have been attempted under less desperate circumstances. But spring still feels impossibly distant, and you suspect that winter has not finished testing your community's resilience. The storm may have ended, but its aftermath presents new challenges: damaged buildings, depleted fuel stores, and the certain knowledge that more severe weather lies ahead. However, as you watch your neighbors working together to dig out from the storm's devastation, you feel something that has been absent from your life for months. Genuine optimism, not the desperate hope of people clinging to unlikely possibilities, but the solid confidence of individuals who have tested their capabilities and discovered reserves they never knew existed. Winter may have more surprises in store, but your village is no longer the same collection of frightened individuals who huddled in separate cottages just weeks ago. You have become something unprecedented, a community that grows stronger under pressure, more innovative in crisis, and more united in the face of challenges that would scatter any collection of merely individual survivors. The worst may still be ahead, but you are ready for it. March arrives not with spring's gentle whisper, but with winter's final roar, as if the season is determined to test every lesson your community has learned about survival and cooperation. The snow that fell during February's great blizzard has compacted into ice so hard it rings like metal when struck, creating a crystalline landscape that reflects sunlight with blinding intensity while offering no hint of the earth that lies buried beneath. You stand in the church tower, which has become the village's observation post, watching the horizon for signs of the supply caravan that should have arrived weeks ago. The delay is troubling, but not yet catastrophic, thanks to the winter stores discovered during the tunnel excavations. However, food rationing has become a precise science that requires daily recalculation as you balance nutrition against depletion rates below. The village has transformed into something that would be unrecognizable to an observer from just 4 months ago. The tunnel system now connects not just the 3 main buildings, but has been expanded to include several cottages and the mill, creating an underground network that allows people to move safely regardless of surface conditions. More importantly, the tunnels have become spaces for specialized activities, workshops where tools are repaired and improved, storage areas where supplies are organized with military precision, and gathering spaces where the community makes collective decisions about increasingly complex survival challenges. Marcus emerges from the tunnel entrance near the church, his face carrying the particular expression of someone who has discovered something significant but is not certain whether it represents good news or bad news. "We have visitors," he announces, "but they are not the supply caravan." You follow him down from the tower and through the tunnel system to the village's southern edge, where a group of travelers has assembled near what used to be the main road. 8 people, heavily bundled against the cold, with sleds carrying what appears to be substantial supplies. More intriguingly, they are accompanied by 2 animals you have not seen in months, horses whose condition suggests they have been well fed throughout the winter. Lady Cordelia joins your observation group, her expression calculating as she studies the newcomers. "Merchants," she concludes after a moment, "but not desperate ones. Look at their equipment, their clothing, the condition of their animals. These are people who have found ways to profit from winter rather than merely survive it." The lead merchant, a woman whose age is impossible to determine beneath layers of expensive fur, approaches your group with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to negotiating from positions of strength. Her first words confirm Lady Cordelia's assessment. I am Alina Komnenos, representing the Northern Trading Consortium. We have heard remarkable reports about your community's winter innovations, and we are here to propose a business arrangement. The very concept of business during a survival winter seems surreal, but Alina's proposal proves both practical and potentially transformative. The Trading Consortium has identified communities that have developed successful survival strategies and is offering to connect them through trade networks that could benefit everyone involved. Your village has achieved something unprecedented, Alina continues, producing maps and documents that suggest extensive intelligence gathering. You have not merely survived winter, you have created sustainable systems for thriving during extended cold periods. There are at least 6 other communities within traveling distance that have developed complementary innovations. She spreads a map across a wooden table that has been carried outside for the negotiations, revealing a network of villages that reads like a catalogue of ingenious survival adaptations. One community has perfected techniques for growing food, in underground gardens heated by carefully managed fires. Another has developed methods for preserving fish that remain edible throughout winter while providing superior nutrition. A third has created textile innovations that produce clothing capable of maintaining warmth in conditions that would defeat traditional wool and leather. The Trading Consortium proposes to facilitate exchanges between these communities. Alina explains your tunnel systems and social organization methods in exchange for their agricultural and preservation techniques. Knowledge trading that could benefit everyone while establishing relationships that enhance long-term survival capabilities. Aldrich immediately recognizes the commercial implications, but his response reveals how profoundly the winter's challenges have changed his perspective. Instead of calculating personal profit, he focuses on community advantage. What guarantees do we have that these other communities will honor agreements? And what prevents the Trading Consortium from exploiting information about our innovations for profit elsewhere? Alina's smile suggests that she has anticipated such questions. The Trading Consortium's business model depends on the long-term success of our partner communities. Communities that fail to thrive cannot participate in ongoing trade networks. Our profit comes from facilitating successful exchanges, not from exploiting individual innovations. The negotiations that follow prove more complex than simple commercial transactions. The Trading Consortium is essentially proposing to create a medieval equivalent of intellectual property exchange, where communities share survival innovations in return for access to other communities, knowledge, and occasional material support during crises. Brother Francis raises the theological implications of the proposal, wondering whether trading survival knowledge might violate Christian principles about helping others regardless of compensation. But Agnes offers a different perspective, arguing that spreading effective survival techniques serves the greater good regardless of the mechanism used to achieve that spread. After 3 days of careful consideration and debate, the community reaches a consensus to participate in the Trading Consortium's network. The decision proves transformative, but not in ways anyone could have predicted. Within 2 weeks, knowledge exchanges begin that revolutionize the village's survival capabilities. The underground gardening techniques acquired from a community 50 miles north enable fresh vegetable production even in the depths of winter. Food preservation methods learned from a village near the coast extend the useful life of stored supplies while improving their nutritional value. More importantly, joining the Trading Consortium network provides access to information about broader, regional conditions that enables much more sophisticated planning for the remainder of winter and preparation for spring. Reports from other communities reveal which areas have successfully maintained livestock through the winter, where seed supplies remain available for spring planting, and which regions have developed effective strategies for post-winter reconstruction. But the most significant benefit proves to be psychological rather than material. Contact with other communities that have successfully survived winter rest challenges provides validation that your village's cooperative approach represents not just lucky improvisation, but a genuinely effective model for community organization under extreme circumstances. As March progresses toward its conclusion, evidence begins to accumulate that winter's grip might finally be loosening. Icicles drip during the warmest parts of days, creating small pools of liquid water that represent the first non-frozen moisture anyone has seen in months. Snowbanks show subtle signs of settling and compacting rather than continuing to accumulate. Most encouraging, David's hunting expeditions begin to encounter animal tracks that suggest wildlife populations have survived the winter in better condition than anyone dared hope. Fresh meat supplements the community's diet just as stored supplies reach their lowest levels, providing both nutrition and psychological encouragement at a critical moment. The Planning Council, which has evolved into the village's de facto governing body, begins developing detailed plans for spring transition activities. Fields must be assessed for winter damage and prepared for planting. Buildings require repair after months of stress from extreme weather. Most importantly, the community must decide which winter innovations to maintain as permanent features and which to abandon as emergency measures no longer needed. Lady Cordelia proposes establishing the village as a permanent hub in the trading consortium network, arguing that the social and physical infrastructure developed during winter could support year-round commerce and knowledge exchange. The proposal generates intense debate, as it would require fundamental changes to the village's traditional agricultural focus. But as you participate in these discussions, you realize that the winter has already transformed your community in ways that make returning to previous patterns impossible. The tunnel system alone represents infrastructure that could support activities unimaginable just months ago. More importantly, the social structures developed for survival have created capabilities for cooperation and collective decision-making that could enable projects far beyond anything previously attempted. The first definitive sign of spring arrives on March 28th, in the form of a sound that has been absent for so long you initially do not recognize it: the drip of melting snow from the church roof. By the next morning, small patches of brown earth have appeared where snow has melted completely, revealing soil that looks startlingly dark and rich after months of white uniformity. Within a week, the transformation accelerates dramatically. Streams begin flowing again, cutting channels through snowbanks and carrying away winterous accumulated debris. Tree branches show subtle swelling that suggests buds preparing to emerge. Most encouraging, the air itself begins to feel different, less sharp and brittle, more fluid and forgiving. On April 5th, you witness something that feels miraculous. After months of unrelenting cold, your breath no longer creates visible clouds when you exhale. The temperature has risen sufficiently that body heat no longer contrasts dramatically with ambient air. It is a small change, but one that signals winter's retreat more clearly than any calendar date. The community's response to spring's arrival reveals how profoundly the winter experience has changed everyone involved. Instead of individual families rushing to reclaim private spaces and resume separate activities, people continue working collectively on shared projects. The tunnel system is extended and improved rather than abandoned. Communal food preparation continues, even when individual cooking becomes possible again. Most significantly, the governance structures developed during winter's challenges continue operating as the community's primary decision-making mechanism. The Planning Council evolves into a permanent institution, with formal procedures for collective decision-making that incorporate input from all community members, regardless of traditional social status. As you stand in the church tower on a morning when sunshine feels genuinely warm rather than merely bright, you reflect on the extraordinary journey your community has completed. Winter arrived as an enemy that threatened to destroy everything you valued about life. It departs having inadvertently created something unprecedented, a community that has discovered capabilities for cooperation, innovation, and mutual support that seemed impossible just months ago. The refugees who arrived as desperate strangers have become integral community members whose contributions proved essential for everyone's survival. Social barriers that seemed permanent fixtures of medieval life have dissolved under the pressure of shared challenges. Knowledge and resources have been shared freely when sharing meant the difference between community survival and collective death. Spring still requires extensive work to repair winter's damage and prepare for next year's agricultural cycle. But for the first time in months, such work feels manageable rather than overwhelming. Your community has not merely survived winter. It has used winter's challenges as opportunities to become stronger, smarter, and more unified than anyone could have imagined possible. The Trading Consortium Network promises to connect your village with other communities that have achieved similar transformations, creating possibilities for continued innovation and mutual support that extend far beyond simple survival. Knowledge developed during desperate circumstances could benefit countless other communities facing similar challenges. As you watch your neighbors emerge from winter's underground refuges to begin spring's work in the strengthening sunshine, you realize that your community has accomplished something historically significant. You have demonstrated that cooperation can triumph over competition, that intelligence can overcome tradition, and that shared humanity can survive even the most extreme circumstances. Winter is ending, but the community it helped forge will endure. The season that threatened to destroy everything you valued has instead revealed capabilities and connections that no one knew existed. In facing winter's ultimate test, your village has discovered not just how to survive, but how to thrive through collective effort and shared determination. Spring has arrived, and with it comes the opportunity to build upon winter's harsh lessons. The future feels full of possibilities that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Your community is ready for whatever challenges or opportunities await, strengthened by the knowledge that together you can overcome anything. Epilogue. 10 years later, April 1419. You stand in the same church tower where you once watched, desperately for supply caravans that never arrived. But the landscape that spreads before you now would be unrecognizable to the young man who climbed these stairs during that terrible winter of 1409, where once a small village huddled against winter's assault. A thriving town bustles with activity that extends far beyond the original boundaries. The tunnel system that began as a desperate survival measure has evolved into something approaching medieval engineering marvel. What started as crude passages connecting 3 buildings now extends throughout the town and into the surrounding countryside, creating a protected network that enables commerce and communication regardless of weather conditions. Merchants from across the region travel specifically to experience what they call the underground market of Ashworth, where goods and knowledge flow freely even during the harshest storms. Agnes passed away 3 winters ago at the remarkable age of 76, but not before seeing her emergency food distribution systems become the foundation for a trading operation that supplies communities throughout northern England. Her final project was establishing the Guild of Winter Wisdom, an organization dedicated to teaching survival techniques to communities that lack experience with extreme weather. Marcus, now married to Catherine, the former refugee leader, serves as mayor of what has officially become Ashworth Township. Their partnership proves that the most unlikely alliances can become the most enduring ones. Catherine's experience with crisis management and Marcus's talent for practical organization created a leadership style that other communities actively seek to emulate. Lady Cordelia, who many credit with preventing the complete collapse of feudal society in the region, has become something unprecedented, a noble who governs through elected councils rather than inherited authority. Her manor house functions as a combination town hall and academy, where representatives from other communities come to study cooperative governance techniques. Brother Francis established the Northern Institute for Herbal Medicine, which has become the region's primary center for training physicians in techniques that combine traditional monastery knowledge with innovations developed during survival. Winters, the Institute's graduates serve communities throughout England and beyond, carrying winter-tested medical knowledge to places that desperately need such expertise. Even Aldrich, the former miser, found his calling, establishing the Consortium Bank, which provides financial services specifically designed to help communities prepare for and survive crisis winters. His transformation from individual profiteer to community benefactor became legendary, inspiring similar conversions among merchants throughout the region. The refugees of that first winter became the foundation for what is now known as the Integration Protocol, a systematic approach to absorbing displaced populations that has been adopted by communities across Northern Europe. David S. Hunting. Techniques are taught at what locals call the Winter Skills Academy, while Margaret's medical innovations have been documented in texts that physicians study from Scotland to Denmark. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation is the least visible one. The social structures that emerged from desperate necessity have evolved into institutions that seem destined to outlast the medieval period entirely. The Planning Council became the model for governance systems that prioritize collective decision-making over inherited authority. The resource-sharing networks developed during scarcity became the foundation for economic relationships based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. You, now recognized throughout the region as Edmund the Organizer, serve as director of the Community Resilience Project, an organization funded by the Trading Consortium to help other communities develop survival capabilities before crisis strikes. Your work involves traveling to villages and towns throughout Northern Europe, teaching the lessons learned during that terrible and transformative winter. The irony is not lost on you that winter's cruelest assault became the foundation for unprecedented prosperity and innovation. The season that threatened to destroy your community instead revealed human capabilities that might never have emerged under gentler circumstances. Desperation forced creativity, scarcity encouraged sharing, and the prospect of collective death inspired unprecedented cooperation. Today, as you watch spring sunshine illuminate a town that thrives on principles developed during winter's darkest days, you reflect on the strange mathematics of human resilience. Crisis, it seems, can subtract everything that seems important while adding capabilities that prove invaluable. Destruction can create opportunities for construction that would never have been attempted otherwise. The children playing in the Streets below have never experienced the kind of desperate winter that forged their community. They take for granted the tunnels, the cooperative institutions, the trading networks, and the social safety systems that ensure no one faces crisis alone. You wonder sometimes whether this represents success or failure. Have you created a generation that lacks the resilience that crisis develops? Or have you accomplished something more valuable, proving that resilience can be built through preparation and cooperation rather than learned through suffering? The question becomes more than academic when scouts report unusual weather patterns developing to the north. Early reports suggest that another severe winter may be approaching, potentially as harsh as the one that transformed your community a decade ago. But this time, you will face it not as frightened individuals hoping to survive, but as an organized community prepared to thrive. The Planning Council, now expanded to include representatives from 12 allied communities, has already begun implementing preparation protocols that would have seemed miraculous during that first terrible winter. Food preservation techniques ensure adequate nutrition for extended cold periods. Housing modifications provide efficient heating for larger populations. Most importantly, social structures exist to maintain cooperation and collective decision-making, even under extreme stress. As evening approaches and you prepare to descend from the tower, you pause for one final look at the landscape that holds so many memories. The fields that once lay barren under snow now show the green promise of spring crops that will feed not just your community, but several others connected through trading relationships. The cottages that once housed frightened families now shelter confident neighbors who understand their interdependence and value their collective strength. In the distance, you can see travelers on the main road approaching the town gates. More refugees, perhaps, seeking the sanctuary that Ashworth has become famous for providing, or traders bringing goods and knowledge from distant communities, or scholars studying the governance innovations that emerged from desperate necessity. Whatever challenges they bring, you know your community is ready. The harsh lessons of that winter 10 years ago have become the foundation for capabilities that grow stronger with each passing season. Winter tested your capacity for cooperation and revealed reservoirs of human resilience that continue to amaze. You, the brutal cold that once threatened to freeze the very life from your bones, taught you that survival depends not on individual strength, but on collective wisdom. The hunger that gnawed at empty stomachs revealed that shared scarcity can become sustainable abundance through intelligent cooperation. The fear that paralyzed isolated families transformed into confidence when people chose to face challenges together rather than alone. As you make your way down the tower stairs, past walls that now hold tapestries depicting the great winter and its aftermath, you carry with you the quiet satisfaction of someone who helped transform desperation into hope, survival into prosperity, and individual fear into collective strength. The church bells ring to call the community to evening prayers, but their sound now carries celebration rather than desperate supplication. Children's laughter echoes through streets that once lay silent under snow. Cooking fires send aromatic smoke into air that once carried only the bitter scent of inadequate fuel and insufficient food. You step out into the spring evening, surrounded by the sounds and sights of a community that discovered how to not merely endure winter's cruelty, but to use it as the foundation for unprecedented human cooperation. The season that was meant to destroy you instead revealed capabilities you never knew existed. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, as all tomorrows do. But tonight, as you walk home through streets filled with neighbors who became family during that terrible and wonderful winter, You carry the unshakable knowledge that whatever difficulties arise, they will be met not by frightened individuals, but by a community that has already proven its ability to transform crisis into opportunity. The winter of 1409 ended long ago, but the community it forged endures. And in that endurance lies perhaps the most important lesson of all, that human beings, faced with impossible circumstances and guided by intelligence rather than instinct, can accomplish things that seem miraculous in retrospect, but were simply necessary at the time. Winter made you cruel by teaching you that cruelty to circumstances must be met with unprecedented kindness to each other. The season's harsh arithmetic forced you to discover new mathematics of cooperation that continue to solve problems no individual effort could address. As the last light fades from the spring sky and lanterns begin to glow in windows throughout the town, you reflect on the strange journey that brought you to this moment. A young peasant who once worried only about gathering enough firewood to keep his family alive through one more night became someone who helps entire communities prepare for challenges that might not arrive for years. The transformation feels both gradual and sudden, both inevitable and miraculous. Like winter itself, change came slowly and then all at once, reshaping everything it touched, while revealing strengths that had always existed but never been tested. You reach your own cottage, larger now, warmer, connected to the tunnel system that links you to neighbors who remain partners in the ongoing project of building a community worthy of the challenges it has overcome. Your family gathers around a table laden with food that represents not just adequate nutrition, but abundance shared with those who helped make such abundance possible. Outside, winter's memorial endures in the form of institutions, relationships, and capabilities that continue to serve the community that crisis created and cooperation sustained. The brutal season that threatened to end everything instead became the beginning of something unprecedented and enduring. As you settle into evening routines that feel both familiar and extraordinary, you carry with you the quiet confidence of someone who has learned winter's deepest secret, that the season's apparent cruelty masks an invitation to discover the resilience and cooperation that make genuine community possible. The harsh teacher has become a cherished memory, its lessons integrated into daily life so thoroughly that they feel like natural wisdom rather than hard-won knowledge. Winter tested you and found you stronger than anyone could have imagined, not because you faced it alone, but because you learned to face it together. In the end, that may be the most important lesson of all, that winter's cruelty was never the real challenge. The true test was whether human beings could choose cooperation over competition, wisdom over tradition, and shared survival over individual advantage when the stakes were literally life and death. Your community passed that test, and in passing, it proved that the human spirit contains reserves of strength and compassion that no winter, however cruel, can ultimately defeat. End.